2025. But right now, it's Robert Johnson. He's a member of the Mississippi House of Representatives, serves District 94, which includes Adams, Franklin, and Jefferson counties. He's the vice chair of the House State Affairs Committee. But more importantly, he is the minority leader in the Mississippi House. Representative Johnson, always good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Gerard. Good to be here.
Yes, sir. So share with us your perspective on the 2025 legislative session. What do you think about it thus far? Of course, you guys are just about done with your business.
Yeah, we are. So far, it's been sort of nip and tuck back and forth. There's a lot of wrangling going on over the two versions of the Senate version of the tax bill and the House version of the tax bill. That's at a standstill. The sports gaming issue is sort of at a standstill. And then you got, the public education issue, school choice. I think it's done, but there is some language in a bill that's in the House, a Senate bill, that issue may try to find life again.
Where do you stand on that, on the issue of school choice, Representative Johnson?
Well, I'm opposed to it, and I'm opposed to it primarily because my mother was a former school teacher, principal, and superintendent. And so there's a certain affinity and understanding about public education that I have. And I also, I'm old enough to grow up in an era where most of the private schools in this state were established in order as a pushback against desegregation. And so I think we need to go to a point where we actually look at what public schools need. And I've had some people say, well, a child should not have to suffer on a poor school system if he can choose where he can go. But, we got to look at the economic part of that. Somebody said that we could work on let the money follow the child. If that happens, then you're only talking about $600 to $800 for a poor kid in Jefferson County. Where is that money going to follow him? Because he's not going to have money to do anything else. I just think we need to have a refocus on public education, making sure that we take care of the infrastructure needs in our schools. Look, we have gotten so that politics and governing has gotten to be gimmicky. And so we have gotten away from the basics: public education, public health, public safety, and public infrastructure. If we just come to work in January and make sure those things are fortified and working efficiently, then we can talk about some other things. But we have not done a very good job of taking care of those four basic things that I think people actually send us here to take care of.
So as you're well aware, last year the public school funding formula was overhauled. Yes. Are you pleased with that new methodology, or do you think that needs some more work?
Well, I think it needs some more work, and I'm not displeased with it. I think the jury is still out on it. It's going to be unlike the adequate education plan that locks in a formula and you either meet it or you don't. This one is sort of fluctuate. It gives the legislature and the governing bodies in the state a little bit more cover, because they can say, yes, we funded education at the level that the money suggests that we can fund it at. That doesn't mean that we're doing it in a manner that takes care of everything we need to take care of, but at least we are saying that we know we have some parameters we have to meet, except that target moves. And so some schools that in the way the formula was set up last year, we're going to get a lot more money. Depending on what our budget looks like, depending on what we have to work with, that money could go down. That didn't happen in the adequate education plan. Your obligation remained constant. And so the jury's still out on it. Let me say this. I believe that the people that are the leaders in education in our legislature care about education. So I don't think they adopted a formula to hurt education. I think they believe in it, and I think that to the extent that it is not doing its job, those same leaders will come back to the board and make sure we get it right.
Do you think, Representative Johnson, that part of the problem of the low-performing districts is that they need more money? Is money the answer here?
Gerard, you are a much better businessman than I am. You proved that, and you know that in order to make something work, you have to invest. You have to put something into it. I'm not saying you throw money at it. I'm not saying you just waste money at it. But you know, if you have school, you know, the philosophy behind public education when it was established in the early 20s was that you should not be penalized as a child because you live in an area that's poor. That no matter what your family or your community's income is, every child should be entitled to an education that will give them an opportunity to pull themselves up. And so I think there are areas in this state that we haven't made the requisite amount of investment in terms of uh, economic development or infrastructure in order to increase their tax base. And I think that's the state's job where we've fallen short. We don't necessarily owe it to the whole community, but you owe it to the children. And so, yeah, a lot of it is money.
Hmm. What about the idea of open enrollment portability? You know, Representative Jansen Owen's bill, which died in the Senate, would have allowed that. Any student that's currently in a public school could transfer to any other public school of their wish, where the receiving public school would have to approve it based on certain parameters and constraints, mainly capacity. But the homeschool couldn't block that, which is the case now. And that legislation died in the Senate. How did you vote on that, and what do you think about that concept?
I think the concept itself is one that could work. I voted against it because I don't think that we put enough effort in it. I think Representative Owens' approach was a good one. I think where he starts and where he wants to finish is right. He took care of the main concern I had was that you may want to transfer to a better school district, but that better school district can always tell you no. And he provided some some rules. He put some rules in place so that would be sort of more of an open market, and you can keep moving. But I think that we need more work on it because, you know, uh, you got to everybody can't transfer. So what happens to that other the school district they're leaving? And so we have to figure out how to have the backup plan. But I think that it's I think we're kind of headed that way. And I appreciate the fact that he put some effort into the bill and it made it much better than it was a couple of years ago. And so I think we just need to continue to work on it.
Okay. I'm assuming you voted against that, right? I'm looking at the vote right here. It looks
Yeah,
like you
I
did.
voted absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's turn our
And look,
attention. Yeah, go ahead.
let me say this. As I've said to the chairman of education, I'm not against consolidation. I'm not against portability. I'm not against it, by itself. But can we, everything that's that transformative, let's spend a little bit more time with it. Let's get it right. That's my only objection.
I see. Let's turn our attention to tax reform. You know, that's the Speaker's priority, HB 1, as it is labeled, major tax reform bill that ultimately eliminates the income tax in the state of Mississippi. The Senate has a different version. Looks like they may be talking about it, leadership is, to see if they can come up with something that would pass both houses. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, well, I would disagree with you that is tax reform. That's what we're doing. I think we're just making tax cuts. I think real tax reform will involve economists and experts to sit down because I do think we need tax reform. I think, and I think part of that equation needs to be major income tax cuts. But you have to, every study I've ever seen on tax reform is tries to achieve revenue neutrality, in the sense that if you're going to cut income tax, you got to find some way to fill in those gaps. We didn't do that. We didn't. We're looking at a $2 billion cut to our budget, and we're not making allowances for how we're going to take care of that. And when I asked the question, the chairman of Ways and Means said we're going to take care of it by growth is going to take care of it. Growth in what? I mean, you decided not to collect a 30% of your taxes. You decided not to collect them, and so where are you going to fill in those gaps? Now, I would tell you, I've looked at tax reform, and back in 2008, Governor Barber had a real tax study and real tax reform outcomes. And what he came out of it with is that, yeah, we can do this, but there are tax exemptions that money we're giving away, and we've been giving them away for years, and some of which we don't need to give away anymore. There are tax allowances that we don't need. People don't need them anymore. So let's try to recoup some of that to fill in those gaps and have some revenue neutral type tax cuts, and that would work. Everywhere you just have a blanket income tax cut or a blanket grocery tax cut or any blanket cut in any state that you've seen them do that, it has been a complete failure, disaster.
We got a break
Arizona,
right here. Representative
yeah,
Johnson, sorry to interrupt you. Can you hang around with us to keep talking?
yeah, sure.
Okay, we got Representative Robert Johnson in the Element Wealth studio on the line. Stay with us. Studio, Representative Robert Johnson, minority leader in the Mississippi House, is our guest. So, Representative Johnson, before we went to break, we were talking about taxes, and you said that you thought it was inappropriate, I guess, to refer to HB1 as tax reform. It was more tax cuts, I think. Don't want to put words in your mouth, is the way you described it. So,
right.
but you said something that caught my attention. You were calling for the elimination of, you used the word exemptions. What are you talking about exactly there, sir?
So, there are certain industries and businesses and individuals for that matter. I can't name them all now, but we have over $1 billion in taxes that we don't collect, that we give people tax cuts on. We did some more of them this year. We did it on farm equipment that's on the showroom floor. We already give farmers a break on sales tax when they buy machinery. And there's a whole list of things, automobile dealers.
Right.
There's a whole list of things, and they were all done in an effort to try to boost the economy, boost manufacturing in some cases, agricultural production, give people an incentive to do more if you collected less tax. And some of them have been around 20 and 25 years. And so, there are people who don't pay the same sales tax that you pay when you buy products. There are people who, in their businesses, they don't pay the same rate of income tax that you pay. And so, and some of those things have existed and would arguably are not necessary anymore. So, that we did that in 2008. I signed on to a tax cut bill. It still wasn't real firm in 2022 when we did a bill that was revenue neutral, and we recoup some of those exemptions. And the people who were getting them, some of them start jumping up and objecting to it. And by the time we finished, we ended up with a tax cut, not tax reform, but a tax cut over $500 million a year, with no recoupment of any of those taxes that we don't collect.
So then,
and so
is it
I would just suggest that. We do a lot of things in the legislature, like education is doing consolidation and school choice, but no real consulting with the department. Why do we have a Department of Education if we don't rely on the experts? Why are we doing tax reform if we don't put the state economists at the table and say, how will this affect us going forward, and is this a good idea? And I would, they don't say it publicly, but every economic expert that I've talked to said, this is a bad idea.
Okay. So is it your position then that we should end these special sales tax rates for these various industries you pointed out, farming, logging, manufactured housing, vehicles? Should all of those goods be taxed at the same standard state 7% sales tax rate?
No, I think we should look at it. We looked at it before. We said, look, well, we don't cut them all the way out. Maybe we just take a portion of it back. This is how much money we can recoup. And so I think you sit down, look at the state of that particular industry. No, some of those industries we need to maintain those levels, but some of them we don't. And we should have people who are experts and have those people at the table and say, what can you stand? What can we do? Because we have to do something. And I don't think you solve that problem by just looking at government and say we're going to cut. We always say we're going to make smaller government. Every time we say we're going to make government smaller, we just do away with an agency, or we cut a bunch of jobs, and then we turn around and contract that same duty out to some private entity, and we're still spending the same amount of money. So why don't we just sit down and put all these things on a spreadsheet and look at where we can fill the gaps and where we can afford the cuts?
The state auditor has actually suggested abolishing the State Department of Education. What do you think about that?
I don't agree with that. I think we should. I mean, far be it from me, and I know I will regret this, agreeing with the auditor, but the auditor taking the step to look at where we can be more efficient is something that we should do as a legislature. I don't know. I don't agree with everything that he said, but at least he made the effort. But I think we could stand to do some of that. And but eliminating the Department of Education, I think that was just that sound. When I look at what he talked about doing with that, it just sounds more political than anything else. But we
I
need a
see.
Department of Education. So
I see.
let's see what we're going to get them to do. I think that works. That is worth looking at.
Would you support reducing or eliminating the sales tax on groceries?
Yeah, I mean, people, as a Democrat, people were saying, don't you support eliminating? I mean, if we're going to eliminate a tax, the sales tax on grocery is the most equitable and fair thing we can do. But we have set up a system. That's what I mean by tax reform, where cities rely on that sales tax that they collect to sort of take care of all the needs that different municipalities have. If we're going to eliminate the sales tax on groceries, we need to figure out how to make cities whole. You just can't just wipe it out, and you got to figure out how to redo your system.
Have you given any thought to what we should do about the public employees' retirement systems? Really, financial headwinds it's facing.
Yeah, let's rehire those over 2,000 state employees that we just cut because it sounded good politically. We don't have enough. And look, and again, I would venture to say 70 to 80% of those people are doing the same work they were doing for the state. They're just doing it for somebody that we're contracting with, like child support services. I mean, if you're gonna when you have more people taking money out of the system, you have paying into the system, it's going to lose money. But yeah, that the first thing I would do is to see how we can uh, reinvigorate the hiring of state employees, getting people. There's not a waste to have people delivering services to the people we represent. It may take looking at it and see how we can do more things more efficiently, but we need those people working and paying into the system if we're going to have a retirement system. And then the state needs to look at. I mean, you keep talking about we cut $500 million out of the budget in on tax reform. We're talking about cutting another 2.2 billion in HB1. Well, if you want to know what to do about the retirement system, then maybe you're not in a position to cut $2.2 billion out of the budget. Maybe you need to figure out how to make sure that you're in a position to fortify those services that are important to the people you represent. But yeah, the first thing I would do is make sure we stop getting rid of employees that are paying into the system.
In the state auditor's report, just talking about cutting government spending, something
Yeah.
I've been talking about for 25 years is the procurement practices in the state of Mississippi, the procurement policies and standards. And the third party that the auditor hired essentially recommended consolidation of much of the procurement function to achieve economies of scale, which would be the primary purpose of that, and just some efficiencies in procurement, which means that agencies would lose autonomy to a great extent in their procurement. You have any thoughts about that?
I think that's the one thing in that report that I think we should look closely at. I mean, not only would they lose autonomy, but you'd also but in the alternative, what you'd end up with is a more uniform system and less patronage in terms of people being able to inject their influence into an agency and who gets a contract, and you end up wasting money or spending too much money, which is what we had with DHS. Think about it, we had a real procurement contract, how much fraud and abuse we could avoid. So
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily agreeing with everything that they said or how to do it, but the procurement process it is a little bit of a joke.
You're probably aware that there are some public sector entities in the state, the city of Jackson, probably the biggest one, that actually grants preferential treatment in its procurement based on minority business enterprise status. And the taxpayers end up in many times paying a premium for a vendor that includes a certain level of minority participation. Do you think that's good policy?
I think minority participation. Look, I'm not backing away from the fact I believe diversity and involvement is important, and I think the way that minority institutions and businesses have been treated in the past, that there's a certain level of priority you need to get to them. Now, I don't think that you should hire somebody just because they're a minority. You know, they're look, in any entity that you need work, there are minority businesses out there that are just as good as anybody else. That's who you should have. The problem with the city of Jackson is not that they were forcing people to have minority participation. They were forcing people to have minority participation, and those minorities had to be their friends, and they would overlook people who were better qualified, better equipped. Look, I watched people. Uh, I watched when Nissan came in. For instance, there were trucking contracts, and they tried to hire minority truckers. They gave contracts to people who didn't even own trucks. When there were minority contractors out there who actually had a trucking company, but they were not connected politically. That's the problem. The problem is not minority participation. The problem is political patronage, and that's what we need to get away from.
Gotcha.
That's what we need to do.
Representative Robert Johnson, he's the minority leader in the Mississippi House of Representatives, has been our guest. Really appreciate you coming on, Representative Johnson. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you for having me. You have a great day.
You bet. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.